Thanks for listening. I hope you find the following episode helpful. Whatever it's about, I hope it teaches you something that you didn't know. Hello, everyone. So, short and sweet, this episode is about Afghanistan's history as it pertains to the United States' and allies' war there from 2001 to 2021. And with that,
The very first thing that's relevant, really, in my opinion, is that the Soviet Union had declared war on Afghanistan's left-wing socialist government, and it was a socialist versus socialist war that lasted for a very long time and got very brutal. And the reason why, I'll just say real quick, from what I understand. What happened was Russia tried to set up a satellite left-wing government in Afghanistan. And just like Tito and Fidel, the left-wing, dictator in Afghanistan, decided that he didn't want to, blank Stalin's blank anymore. So there was a war as a result of that. It wasn't Stalin, but, just the Soviet Union's Russia. So Russia decided that their left-wing satellite, since it had stopped being a satellite, was now no better than a capitalist government. So they went to kick its ass because they knew that the first world wouldn't defend a left-wing dictatorship. So it's just like if they had decided to go invade Yugoslavia. It's like, well, and also Russia wanted to get away into the Persian Gulf over land. So Afghanistan's very strategic too. It always has been throughout history. And the main thing that's relevant about that war, first of all, it gave birth to the Taliban and also the Taliban's enemy, the Mujahideen, who are the Taliban. The Mujahideen, from what I understand, just refers to Afghan national freedom fighters. And so some were Taliban, some weren't. You have to think of it, guys, a lot like the Syrian civil war, where it started out as one thing, and then after a while, different parties get involved. So Osama went there, and you had Al Qaeda, but he was a small part of the Mujahideen. And the Taliban, all of the Islamic fanatics, like Al Qaeda and all that, is from after the Bosnian War. So yeah, like Al Qaeda didn't start doing terrorist attacks until after the Bosnian War. So that's like early 90s. That's like how old I am, 29. And this happened all before that. So the Mujahideen were a bunch of different groups. Just like in Syria, you've got like every group under the sun fighting in Syria. So it was a lot of the Muslim world fighting in Afghanistan. And Russia did what the United States wouldn't do. They realized that the only way to win as a centralized Afghan government is to, first of all, control the urban areas, which is easy to do, and the United States and Russia could both do that within a week. And then second of all, control the logistical supply lines that go in between those urban centers and military bases. And to do that, you have to control the countryside. And Russia, late in the war, decided that since you can't really control the countryside effectively, just like the United States couldn't, they were going to depopulate it. So they basically went full Agent Orange on Afghanistan. Agent Orange was dumped on a military supply line. Russia went full on just exterminate, like literally, like just exterminate Afghanistan's farmland, and then have them import food, whatever. So it's like, oh well, okay, so we can control the cities and not the countryside, just like the Americans, just like the British, just like everybody who's ever been here, just like Alexander the Great, just like everybody. We can control cities, but we can't control the steppes. Well, okay, that's cool. We'll just we'll just burn to earth the steppes. You know what I mean? Like they're Russians. They're just like, well, what do we do when we have a problem? We just burn everything, burn our own shit, and then we'll just have the Afghans buy food from us. You know, I mean, Russia, like they're mean. You know, they get mean. They're not always mean, but if you they get mean, meaner than America even. So that was devastating to Afghanistan. Like devastating. The country that was left after that was like kind of like Cambodia post Pol Pot, where everything's just kind of gone and you're starting from scratch. And that's the environment that the Taliban was born out of. Because what happened was when the when the Ruskies left, now you have all these remnant groups. It's like, okay, imagine if Assad, okay, imagine if what had actually happened in the Syrian civil war was Putin had gotten mad at Assad because Assad had told Putin that he didn't want to be Putin's little boy anymore. So then Putin gets mad at Assad, invades Syria, kills Assad early on, and then fights ISIS as an occupying Russian force. Doesn't kill, I don't think. I'll have to see what happened to the old Afghan dictator, but and then so it's as if Russia had invaded Syria, and then Russia is fighting ISIS in Syria, but ISIS it's more like earlier in the war. You're fighting the Kurds, you're fighting ISIS, you're fighting this, you're fighting that. ISIS didn't even exist yet. The Taliban didn't even exist yet. It's a lot like Syria. And then as you can see, like the more war torn the country gets, the better pull extremists have, and the better stability extremists have, because the normal structures and institutions just can't function. They can't survive. So you just have a bunch of warlords and corrupt institutions. Now, a religious fanatic group like ISIS or the Taliban are going to be better because they're not corrupt, because they have the fear of God. You don't need the fear of God if you have strong secular institutions. But how do you do that? Well, so basically, to wrap it up, what you want to know about the intro going in, like Afghanistan's background. It was first of all, Afghanistan's a beautiful country. Like it should be like Iran, where it's a wonderful, beautiful, like Kabul and like Bamyat, and like Kandahar. I mean, like you can't imagine how wonderful and beautiful of a country Afghanistan is and was. And then because it's at this crossroads, it just got messed with by a lot of people through all of history. And um, I feel like the what we're dealing with right now is kind of the Russians dealt a blow that left the country like war torn, like Syria would be without Assad, and then ISIS takes over. So then the Taliban takes over. And then the United States comes in and sort of, honestly, in my opinion, right now, guessing this is what, mid-December 2021, it seems to me like it's going to look kind of like America was never there. Like by 2030, if the Taliban is still in charge in 2030, it might look very similar to as if America had never even gone. A lot like Vietnam, where it's like Vietnam today looks a lot like if we had won. It's like, what do they do? Well, they're a little bit more China friendly than Taiwan and South Korea are, but that's about it. Like they're not communists. So um it seems like, besides individual lives and helping individual Afghanis get out and stuff, the United States sort of has. I mean, I don't think it has anything to show for its efforts there. the Taliban is stronger than it was before. So, yeah. What we will have to see is if the United States sufficiently modernized and secularized Kabul and other urban areas to force the Taliban to either moderate or, you know, be hurting economically. Because the United States, once you have doctors and stuff, it's like, well, you want to kill all your doctors like Pol Pot did? Because that's what Pol Pot did. He was like, okay, well, they educated a bunch of people, we'll just kill them. Okay, well, you know, if the Taliban tried to do that now, I don't know. They could probably get away with it. I don't know if anyone's going to go to Afghanistan to stop them, but there'd be a lot of problems. I think the Taliban itself is different, but also the same. Um, and yeah, they were born out of war, out of a civil war, and you want to understand who the Taliban are. It's very important to understand who the Taliban are. The Taliban are not like from Afghanistan, really. They're from Pakistan more than they are from Afghanistan. They straddle the border. It's a lot like how the Kurds straddle the border of Turkey, Iraq. I think a tiny bit of Iran and Syria. Just like how Kurdistan's like that. The Taliban are part of an ethnic group that I think the Pashtun, who are spread out along the steeps, like the Pakistan and Afghanistan mountains and steeps, and they get a lot of money. Their money comes from tolls and stuff taken from people passing along what used to be the Silk Road, going through into between like China and Iran, or China to the Middle East, Pakistan to India. Pakistan, basically India, Pakistan, China, West. You go through Taliban territory, and they take, tolls and things, and they get the article I read. If I dig it up, I could try to find it if it's important. But it was a New York Times article talking about it. It was they get hundreds of millions a year from that, and that's enough to do a lot. I'll talk about the way that they fight later, because you have to understand the money and the attrition. Attrition is their strategy. So, they make their money go as far as they can, Like, they'll buy a Mosin Nagant and a bunch of ammo and try to make the United States waste an airstrike on it so that they get $500 to $50,000, So, they're different. Like, they're not the same as the Mujahideen, because the United States, when we went in, the plan was to leave the country up to the Mujahideen and the other dictator who had fought the Taliban, his remnant people. The Taliban had dispatched him, but because the Taliban fought a civil war after the Russians left, so it's like if Syria went into a civil war after Assad died, right? Or Putin left. Like, they're just fighting each other. And the guy's name started with an M, I believe, and he still has a pretty big following. He was a very brutal dictator who killed many civilians and stuff, committed atrocities, but he fought the Taliban. So we were hoping that his army, his disbanded army, who we called the Mujahideen, they are the Mujahideen, but you have to remember that the Taliban sort of are Mujahideen too, because Mujahideen is like saying Syrian freedom fighter, kind of. But the bulk of the Mujahideen was made up of, like, this guy's force. So it's kind of interesting, was made up of like domestic Afghanis, not Pakistanis like the Taliban are. Now, the Taliban used to be much, much more in Afghanistan, but they've gone, during the war, they went back to Pakistan, and now they're going to come back into Afghanistan. But there's not that many of them. Like, if you have like 20 million people and you have like 5% move, that's like a lot of people for Afghanistan and Pakistan, like rural areas, So It's basically impossible to kill them all. You'll never kill them all. And even if you could, you shouldn't, because that's wrong. So, you know, they have a certain worldview that's not all that pro-West. It's kind of like the Saudis, right? Like, you've just got these people there, and what are you going to do about them? Well, you kind of just have to work with it. And so, that's the situation the United States was looking at in 2001. Al-Qaeda was in full swing now. They had been in full swing for like 8 years. The United States had been hunting Osama for a little longer than that. The Russians, the USSR was gone, so all that stuff was irrelevant. The Taliban had control of Afghanistan. They had consolidated. They'd won the Afghan Civil War. And then they were also letting Osama chill there and hang out. Because, the Saudi government and Osama's from Saudi Arabia, but the Saudi government, they would have, I don't even want to think about what they would have done to him if they dismembered a journalist. What they would have done to Osama bin Laden is probably too much even for me. So he wasn't going to be able to go back home, right? So he hung out in Somalia and places like that. And so that's the situation the United States is looking at in 2001. And so, some of the United States' assumptions was that the Mujahideen, once reassembled and rebanded, sure, they lost their dictator guy, but just give them another one or something. They figured that they would at least have an army. It's like, okay. They lost their leader or whatever. It's like Saddam's army, the Iraq army. It's like, they lost their leader or whatever, but they still know how. There's still a bunch of guys who know how to fight. So we just need to teach them new doctrine and whatever. They thought that it would at least be okay, the Civil War just ended. And I think that the United States didn't realize just how thoroughly the Taliban had consolidated their position. There was pretty much nothing left of substance. The Taliban's too brutal for, after the American Civil War, even after Sherman's march, you could have reinstated slavery in the South and had people who were sympathetic to the Confederacy if, think of if the UK and France had invaded, 2 years after the Civil War ended and tried to set up the Confederacy. They probably could have found enough sympathetic people to do it and form the government. The United States figured, well, geez, surely we can do that. I mean, the Civil War was only... Well, the Taliban's pretty mean, dude. They're mean. They're really bad. The Taliban's really bad. I don't like them. So yeah, we're looking at almost 20 minutes for the background.
Oh, I guess that's it. Well, thanks for listening.